The day my girlfriend was acknowledged and brought back into her wealthy biological family, her own mother slapped her across the face in front of everyone. All because the fake heiress tearfully said, "Did my sister break the necklace Mom gave me on purpose because she can't stand the sight of me?" Smack. The instant that slap landed, the entire room fell silent. Susan stood in the middle of the living room, her face turned slightly to the side. A bright red handprint quickly surfaced against her pale skin. She didn't cry. She didn't explain herself either. She simply lifted her head slowly and looked at the woman who was supposedly her biological mother for the very first time, her eyes growing colder bit by bit. And me, standing at the doorway, I saw those scarlet words floating above her head with my own eyes. The real heiress versus fake heiress storyline has officially begun. The real heiress is too prideful, unlikable, and refuses to cry, so she deserves to be misunderstood. The fake heiress is fragile, kind, and knows how to play weak, so everyone favors her. Chapter 1. I stared at those lines and slowly narrowed my eyes. Here we go again. 3 months ago, something in this world started going seriously wrong. Certain people would suddenly have bizarre plot commentary floating above their heads. The manipulative pick-me coworker had this written above hers. "She's just emotionally neglected." The cheating boss had this. "He just doesn't know how to express himself." Clearly trash. Clearly people who belonged behind bars. Yet somehow, according to those stupid words, they all had their reasons. Meanwhile, the people who were rational, principled, and actually clear-headed were always painted as the villains. Especially women. The more suffering they endured quietly, the more everyone pitied them. The more self-aware and rational they were, the more everyone hated them. Susan was exactly the kind of person this melodramatic, bullshit logic loved to target. She was the real heiress. According to the plot, she would return to her rich family, get framed over and over again by the fake heiress, be repeatedly misunderstood by her biological parents, humiliated by her brothers, despised by her fiancé, cyberbullied by the entire internet, and then, only after everyone was consumed by regret, she would forgive them all through tears while carrying scars all over her body and soul. At first, I thought it was ridiculous, until today, until I personally saw that slap land on her face. I stopped holding back. I walked in and kicked someone without hesitation. Bang. Diego Tang, the second young master of the Tang family, had just tried to shield the fake heiress when I sent him crashing straight over the coffee table. He went tumbling to the floor along with shattered cups and glass. Screams instantly erupted throughout the room. "James." Susan looked at me abruptly, but I didn't spare anyone else a glance. I walked straight toward her, lowered my eyes to the handprint on her face, and nearly lost control of the rage burning inside me. "Who hit you?" The living room fell deathly silent. Mrs. Tang's face turned pale. "Why you? Who are you?" I lifted my gaze and locked onto hers. "I'm her boyfriend, and starting today, anyone who dares lay a finger on her again will regret it for the rest of their life." The Tang family clearly hadn't expected me to flip the entire table like this, because in their minds, this was supposed to be the perfect dramatic family reunion scene. The real heiress returns home for the first time, nervous, humble, awkward, uneasy. The fake heiress reddens her eyes and sheds a few tears, and the whole family naturally rushes over to comfort her. Then the mother cries, the father frowns, and the two brothers take turns accusing the real heiress of being unreasonable. Finally, the real heiress swallows her grievances and backs down with tears in her eyes. That was how the story was supposed to go. Too bad. I wasn't here to follow the plot. I was here to destroy it. Chapter 2. Diego Tang climbed up from the shattered glass, his face dark with fury. "You dare start a fight in the Tang family home?" I did. "So what?" I stared at him, my voice calm but cold enough to send chills down anyone's spine. "When that slap landed just now, none of you stopped it. But the second I kick you once, suddenly you know how to scream. So what? The Tang family rules are that you're allowed to bully her, but nobody's allowed to stand up for her." "You, shut up." I cut him off directly. Then I turned to look at Mrs. Tang on the sofa. She looked impeccably maintained, wearing a custom-made qipao, with perfectly manicured nails polished to perfection. And yet just moments ago, that elegant, well-cared-for hand had slapped her own biological daughter across the face without hesitation. The line above her head kept flashing. "She's suffering too. She just doesn't want her adopted daughter to feel wronged." I almost laughed from sheer anger. She didn't want the adopted daughter to feel wronged, so she wronged her biological daughter instead. What kind of deranged logic was that? Mrs. Tang finally seemed to snap back to reality and frowned at Susan. "Susan, I was just anxious earlier." "Anxious about what?" I interrupted immediately. "Anxious to defend the adopted daughter who stole her place in this family for 20 years. The girl in the white dress beside her stiffened instantly, tears immediately streaming down her cheeks. That was Romina Tang, the fake heiress the Tang family had raised for 20 years. And also the fragile little darling at the center of this cliché soap opera plot, showered with everyone's love and favoritism. Her eyes were red as she spoke in a trembling voice. I never wanted Mom to hit my sister. I was just so panicked when I saw the necklace broken. There it was, the standard manipulative coquette routine. Looking at her tear-streaked face, I genuinely wanted to hand her an award for Best Actress. So what? You panicked. And that gives you the right to accuse her without even checking what happened first. You shed a couple tears, and everyone's supposed to charge into battle for you. Romina bit her lip, looking like she might faint from crying at any second. At that point, the eldest brother, Phineas, finally couldn't stay silent anymore. That's enough, Susan. Since you've brought your boyfriend here, then let's make things clear. Romina grew up in the Tang family. She didn't intentionally steal your identity, and she's innocent in all of this too. You just came back, and now the whole house is in chaos because of you. Don't you think you're going too far? Nice. The classic line, the beneficiary is innocent, and the victim should stop causing trouble. The more I listened, the funnier it became. She's innocent. I turned to look at Phineas. Then what about Susan? Isn't she innocent too? She suffered outside for 20 years. The first time she comes home, your whole family surrounds her like she's on trial. Your mother slaps her, your brother yells at her, and all of you protect an outsider while making her stand here like a joke. And now you're telling me Romina is innocent. Then let me ask you this, if the person standing here getting slapped today was Romina, would you still tell her not to make a scene? Phineas's face turned green from being cornered speechless, because he knew the answer. He wouldn't. If Romina shed even a single tear, the entire family would spend half the day heartbroken over it. But when Susan got slapped, their first reaction was she being too aggressive? That was the most disgusting thing about these melodramatic plotlines. They were never about fairness, they were about favoritism. Whoever got favored was automatically right. Too bad for them. I hated that kind of thing the most. I grabbed Susan's hand and pulled her directly behind me protectively. If this family reunion has to happen like this, then forget it. If you all want to keep acting out your perfect happy family drama where everyone protects the adopted daughter, I won't stop you. But there's one thing. My gaze swept across the entire room, my voice turning completely icy. If I hear anyone insult her again, I'll make sure they never speak another word for the rest of their life. At that moment, the entire living room fell dead silent. Everyone had been intimidated by the sheer madness in my tone. Chapter 3. I grabbed Susan's hand and turned to leave. Just as we reached the doorway, Mr. Tang's voice rang out from behind us, suppressing obvious anger. Stop right there. I paused. The true head of the Tang family had finally spoken. Young man, the Tang family is not a place for you to run wild. I turned back to look at him and laughed. What a coincidence. She's not someone your family gets to push around either. Chairman Tang, since you're the one in charge here, let me give you one piece of advice. How you treat her today is exactly how she'll repay you in the future. I guarantee it. After we left the Tang residence, Susan didn't say a single word the entire ride. When we reached the riverside, she suddenly spoke. Pull over. I parked the car by the road. The night wind was freezing. She stepped out and walked alone to the railing, standing there silently for a long time. I didn't rush her. I didn't try to comfort her either, because at times like this, all comfort feels weightless. When someone is truly hurting, they have to survive that suffocating feeling themselves first. After a long while, she finally spoke in a low voice. James, yeah. Do you think people are all this pathetic? My chest tightened. She turned her head slightly. The wind blew the loose strands of hair across her forehead, but the red handprint on her face still hadn't faded. I honestly never expected anything from them, but when the moment really came, I still wondered if maybe, even just a little, they might stand on my side. But they didn't. They couldn't even be bothered to investigate before deciding I was the problem. Her voice wasn't loud, yet the calmer she sounded, the heavier it pressed against my chest. I walked over and draped my jacket across her shoulders. Do you know what the funniest part is? It's not that they play favorites. It's that while favoring someone else, they still expect you to be understanding. They want to protect the adopted daughter while also demanding maturity and forgiveness from their biological daughter. They want everything, but they never want to pay any price for it. Susan stayed silent. I reached out and gently turned her face toward me. Does it hurt? Her eyelashes trembled slightly. A little. I stared at the red mark on her cheek, my gaze turning completely cold. Then remember it. Don't make excuses for them. Don't forgive them on their behalf. One day, they'll repay this slap tenfold. She looked at me, then suddenly smiled faintly. James, you seem even angrier than I am. No shit, I said. The slap landed on your face, but it hurt my heart. Her eyes instantly reddened, but not from grievance. It was the kind of emotion that came from finally having someone stand unconditionally on her side. She asked softly, what if they stay like this forever? I looked directly at her and answered word by word. Then I'll beat some sense into them until they never dare act like this again. She froze for 2 seconds, then actually laughed because of me. But at that moment, those floating words above her head appeared again. The real heiress will repeatedly compromise because she longs for familial love. The male lead's protection is only temporary. In the end, she must still bear everything alone. I stared at those lines and slowly clenched my fists. Bear everything alone. Fuck that bullshit. As long as I was here, she wouldn't have to endure a damn thing by herself. That very night, I had people investigate every connection and power network tied to the Tang family. If this melodramatic storyline insisted on using the real heiress versus fake heiress trope as its weapon, then I'd snap that weapon in half at the root. Chapter 4. The next day, the Tang family held a formal family banquet. On the surface, it was meant to welcome Susan home, but any idiot could tell this was a full-blown trap because practically every wealthy family in the city had shown up. The real heiress, the fake heiress, the biased parents, 2 overprotective brothers. Who wouldn't want to watch that kind of drama unfold? And if Susan refused to attend, people would call her petty and uncultured, saying she couldn't handle high society. But if she came, she'd be walking straight into a public humiliation. The Tang family's scheme was so obvious that even an idiot could understand it. Going? I asked her. Yes. Susan stood in front of the mirror in a black evening gown, her back perfectly straight. They want me to embarrass myself, don't they? Then I'll go see exactly who ends up embarrassed. I looked at her and smiled. That was more like it. The moment we entered, every gaze in the room turned toward us in unison. Some were sizing her up, some were comparing, some were openly enjoying the spectacle, and some didn't even bother hiding their contempt. After all, in their eyes, Susan was just some wild girl raised outside the elite world. Romina, meanwhile, was the real socialite they'd watched grow up. What they didn't know was, this banquet would become the beginning of the Tang family's dignity shattering into pieces. Less than 10 minutes after we arrived, someone finally made the first move. A wealthy woman in a sapphire blue gown covered her mouth and smiled. Susan, I heard you grew up in an ordinary family. Then you should really learn from Romina. High society has a lot of rules. Not everyone can adapt to it. Several people nearby immediately chimed in. That's right. Romina has always been so graceful. She's been elegant and well-mannered since childhood. Some things really can't be learned later in life. Every word practically screamed, "You're beneath her." Before Susan could respond, I smiled first. Auntie, you're absolutely right. Some things really can't be learned later in life. The woman froze. What do you mean by that? I looked at her leisurely. Like manners. People with manners don't use someone else's background as gossip. And they definitely don't pretend to care while making passive-aggressive insults. At your age, and you still haven't learned that, honestly, there's probably no saving it now. The entire room instantly fell silent. A few seconds later, someone almost burst out laughing before quickly holding it back. The wealthy woman's face turned bright red. You, what about me? I lifted my wine glass toward her lazily. Please continue. I love watching people grow older, louder, and dumber at the same time. At once, the way everyone looked at me changed. They probably had never seen someone refuse to follow the usual rich family drama script. Well, obviously. Do you know the biggest taboo in a power fantasy story? It's when someone steps all over the protagonist's head, and the protagonist still acts restrained and polite. If you're going to slap someone back, you do it on the spot. If you're taking revenge, you take it immediately. Delay even 1 second, and the audience gets frustrated, and the real climax would come 20 minutes later. Mrs. Tang brought out an emerald necklace and announced in front of everyone, "This necklace has always belonged to the daughters of the Tang family. Today, I want to personally give it to Susan." The moment those words fell, the room went silent, because everyone knew that necklace had always been assumed to belong to Romina. Taking it out now could only mean one thing. The Tang family was making a public statement. But the second I glanced over, I knew something was wrong, because the lines above Romina's head suddenly began flashing wildly. The necklace will disappear. Everyone will assume the real heiress stole it. She will become a complete laughingstock. I smiled. Good. So they were pulling this trick again. Chapter 5. Sure enough, less than half an hour later, the necklace was gone. The first person to cry out was Romina. "Mom, the necklace is missing." That single scream instantly pushed the atmosphere in the banquet hall to its peak. Everyone turned to look. Mrs. Tang's expression changed immediately. How could it disappear? Romina bit her lip, her eyes reddening instantly as she glanced hesitantly toward Susan. That expression practically screamed that she already suspected someone, and Diego was the first to jump out. She was the only one who touched the necklace earlier. He pointed sharply at Susan, his tone furious and accusatory. "Susan, what's wrong with you? You just got back and you're already stealing from your own family." That one sentence instantly ignited the entire room. Whispers exploded everywhere. "No way. She really did something like that. Well, if someone's never seen jewelry like this before, it's understandable to get tempted. Standing there listening to it all, I felt my temples throbbing. See? That was the power of the plot. No evidence. No investigation. As long as the real heiress wasn't soft enough, weak enough, or tearful enough, all the malice in the world would automatically be thrown at her. Susan's expression turned ice cold. You're accusing me of stealing. Do you have proof? Proof? Diego sneered. A girl who came back from some low-class outside life like you. Smack. A sharp crack instantly cut him off. Not me, Susan. Her slap landed hard across Diego's face, and the entire banquet hall fell silent. Diego's head snapped to the side from the force, completely stunned. Not just him. Everyone in the room froze. Probably because nobody expected this real heiress they assumed would endure everything quietly, swallow her grievances, and desperately explain herself, to hit someone outright instead. Susan shook out her slightly numb hand, her gaze colder than ice. That slap was to teach you how to speak like a human being. If I ever hear you insult my background again, I'll rip your mouth apart. Standing beside her, I nearly applauded on the spot. Exactly. That was how it should be. Why endure bullshit? When people are already stomping on your head and humiliating you, what dignity are you still trying to protect? After Diego recovered from the shock, he completely exploded. You dare hit me? He raised his hand to strike back. The next second, I grabbed his wrist and twisted it backward. Crack. A crisp snapping sound echoed through the hall. Diego screamed instantly as I dislocated half his arm on the spot. Move one more time, and I'll dislocate the other one too. My voice wasn't loud, but Diego's face had already gone pale from the pain. Cold sweat pouring down his forehead. The entire hall fell deathly silent. Phineas shot to his feet. James. I didn't even bother looking at him. I simply snapped my fingers. The massive screen in the banquet hall suddenly lit up. Surveillance footage began playing clearly for everyone to see. In the video, Romina took advantage of the crowd's distraction to slip the necklace into the inner compartment of her handbag. Then she turned around, wearing that same pitiful, innocent expression everyone knew so well. The entire room erupted in shock. Chapter 6. She really hit it herself. Oh my God, has she lost her mind? That was a deliberate setup. Romina's face turned deathly pale in an instant, tears immediately streaming down her cheeks. No, that's not true. I didn't. I pointed at the giant screen. Your own performance was caught on camera, and you're still pretending. Do you seriously think that as long as you cry, everyone has to believe you? Do you think the whole world is supposed to revolve around you? Romina, this little stunt of yours isn't some harmless tantrum from a spoiled girl. This was intentional framing. If the police got involved, do you know what that's called? It's called a crime. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed straight onto the floor. Mrs. Tang hurried to help her up, but the moment she reached out, Susan's calm voice nailed her in place. What? This time you're not slapping me. One sentence. Straight for the throat. Mrs. Tang froze completely, the color draining from her face, because she finally realized just how stupid, disgusting, and unfair that slap had been. Too bad. It was already too late. I lifted my eyes and swept my gaze across every member of the Tang family, my voice colder than ice. Listen carefully. From today onward, if anyone dares throw dirt on her name again, I won't talk to you about family ties, and I definitely won't talk to you about dignity. I'll only talk about consequences. That night, the Tang family lost every last shred of face they had left, and that was only the beginning. If the necklace incident merely tore off Romina's fragile innocent flower mask, then the next person to appear, Domingo Ku, existed purely to disgust people. He was the only son of the Ku family, and Romina's childhood sweetheart. In the original cliché plotline, he would constantly look down on the real heiress for being crude while pitying the fake heiress for being wronged, eventually delivering some dramatic line like, "The position of Mrs. Ku will only ever belong to Romina." In some trashy romance novels, readers would probably swoon over garbage like that, but in real life, it just made people want to punch him. That day, I accompanied Susan to Tang Corporation headquarters. The moment we stepped into the lobby, he blocked our path. The man wore an expensive tailored suit, looked decent enough, and carried himself with that fake arrogant aura rich heirs love to pretend they had. The moment he opened his mouth, he didn't disappoint. "Susan, I suggest you quit while you're ahead." I almost laughed. Nice. Starting off that pretentious already. Domingo looked at her with open condescension in his eyes. "Romina has suffered enough already. There's no need for you to push her into a corner. And regarding the marriage agreement between the Tang and Ku families, you'd better not entertain thoughts you shouldn't have. The position of Mrs. Ku isn't meant for just anyone." The entire lobby instantly quieted down. Several employees nearby secretly glanced over. Normally, anyone put in a situation like this would feel embarrassed or humiliated. But Susan didn't even blink. "Who are you?" Domingo's expression froze. I nearly burst out laughing. That line hit harder than slapping him across the face, because narcissistic idiots like him hated one thing most: realizing they weren't important enough to even be remembered. Domingo's face darkened. "What are you pretending for? Romina and I have known each other for 20 years. The bond between us isn't something a random outsider like you could ever compare to." The moment he said that, I genuinely couldn't hold back anymore. I walked over and casually placed a hand on his shoulder. "Bro, what expired CEO romance novel did you crawl out of?" Domingo frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means..." The smile on my face slowly disappeared. "If you say one more piece of bullshit in front of her, I'll personally teach you that modern society governed by law has no place for idiots like you." Chapter 7. The moment the words left my mouth, I suddenly exerted force and slammed his shoulder downward. Domingo let out a muffled grunt. Bang. His knees crashed hard against the floor as he dropped to the ground on the spot. The entire lobby erupted in gasps. I looked down at him, my voice terrifyingly calm. "So the position of Mrs. Koo is that precious? Then keep it for yourself. My girlfriend isn't interested." Domingo's face instantly turned the color of liver. He tried to struggle, but I pressed down harder, lowering my voice so only the few of us could hear. "If I hear you bring up that marriage arrangement again, I'll package all your drunk driving, tax evasion, and mistress-related evidence and deliver it straight to your father's company entrance." That completely froze him. He jerked his head up to look at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. I smiled. "Go on. Weren't you acting all superior just now? What happened? Cat got your tongue." At that moment, the line above his head started flashing wildly. "The devoted male supporting character persona has collapsed." My mood instantly improved. Exactly. It deserved to collapse. All this fake devotion and nobility forced into existence by plot armor deserved to be stomped into pieces. After that, things only became more insane. First, a project Susan had worked on tirelessly for half a month at the company had its credit secretly altered by Romina. Then gossip accounts suddenly started spreading rumors online, claiming that Susan had forced out the adopted daughter after returning to the wealthy family, calling her manipulative and saying her private life was a mess. Eventually, even Susan's adoptive parents were harassed. Someone splashed red paint all over their front door and walls, with huge words written across them. "You stole someone else's daughter for 20 years. That night, when I accompanied Susan back there, her adoptive mother was standing at the doorway with a rag still clutched tightly in her hands, her eyes red from crying. "Susan, Mom's fine, don't worry." Susan stood frozen in place, trembling all over, not from fear, from rage so intense her entire body shook. The two people she cared about most in this world were the ordinary couple who had raised her. No matter how disgusting the Tang family was, she could still force herself to endure it. But the moment they targeted her adoptive parents, they had completely crossed the line. I stood at the doorway, staring at the vandalized wall, my gaze turning colder and colder. Then I turned around and started walking away. Susan grabbed my arm immediately. "Where are you going?" "To make them suffer." Her grip tightened. "James." I turned back to look at her. Her eyes were red, but her voice was incredibly steady. "This time, I'm going with you." I suddenly smiled. Good. That night was the first time Susan truly took the initiative. Not passive self-defense, a full counterattack. We first organized all the evidence showing Romina bribing gossip accounts, secretly filming videos, maliciously editing footage, and manipulating public opinion. Then we compiled records of the altered project credits, Domingo's scandals, the necklace surveillance footage, and every misleading accusation the Tang family had spread against her. Everything was arranged into a complete evidence package in chronological order. At 1 in the morning, we released it all online. At the same time, 17 lawyer letters were sent out together. The internet exploded the next morning. The real heiress fighting back after being slandered. The fake heiress staging her own framing schemes. The young master of the Koo family cheating with multiple women. The Tang family getting exposed for favoring the adopted daughter. The comment sections completely erupted. Holy shit. So the adopted daughter's side was manipulating public opinion the whole time. This is evil as hell. She stole someone's identity for 20 years and still cyberbullied the victim afterward. That scene where the biological mother slapped her own daughter made my blood pressure skyrocket. If I were the real heiress, I'd burn the Tang family to the ground. Her boyfriend is way too badass. The guy's basically a human weapon of mass destruction. Chapter 8. The internet was in complete chaos. Both the Tang family and the Koo family exploded overnight. But the thing that satisfied me the most was this. When Susan looked at the overwhelming wave of comments supporting her on her phone, she wasn't excited. She wasn't thrilled either. She simply let out a quiet breath and said, "So, speaking clearly and presenting evidence really does work better than bottling everything up." I looked at her and replied softly, "Remember this feeling. From now on, whenever someone makes your life miserable, Hit back hard. If reason works, use reason. If reason doesn't work, use evidence. And if evidence still isn't enough, then let me handle it. She looked up at me, and for the first time in a long while, light returned to her eyes, and at that exact moment, I suddenly realized the blood-red plot text floating above her head had started to blur, as if it was beginning to lose control over her. But I never expected the plot's will to become this insane. When manipulation, rumors, and framing no longer worked, it escalated straight to kidnapping. That afternoon, Susan went to meet a client. Then she disappeared. The last location from her phone signal pointed to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The second I received the alert call, my head buzzed violently. But more than panic, what I felt was pure, bloodthirsty rage, because I knew, this time, they truly wanted to destroy her. While I sped toward the warehouse, those familiar floating words appeared again. Final stage of the real heiress versus fake heiress storyline. The fake heiress has completely descended into madness. The male lead will arrive at the final moment to save the heroine. I stared at those lines, veins bulging across the back of my hand. The final moment. Fuck your final moment. I slammed the accelerator to the floor and reached the warehouse in 20 minutes. The instant I kicked the door open, everyone inside turned around. Susan was tied to a chair, blood staining the corner of her mouth, and Romina stood in front of her holding a knife. Her face twisted so badly she was almost unrecognizable. Why won't you just lose for once? You already have everything. Why do you still have to steal from me? Mom and Dad are mine. My brothers are mine. Domingo is mine. Everything in the Tang family belongs to me. Why did you have to come back? She screamed hysterically. There wasn't a trace left of that fragile innocent girl persona anymore. Susan lifted her head and looked at her. Her face was pale, yet she still smiled faintly. You're wrong. I didn't steal anything from you. The things you stole were never yours to begin with. That sentence pierced straight into Romina like a blade. She completely snapped and raised the knife to stab downward at Susan. At that exact instant, I charged forward. Bang. One kick sent the knife flying from her hand. At the same time, several thugs nearby grabbed steel pipes and rushed toward me. I didn't even dodge. I snatched one of the pipes mid-swing and smashed it straight back into the first guy's face. The sound of bones cracking made everyone's scalp go numb. The second thug had just rushed up when I drove my knee hard into his stomach, forcing him to collapse to the ground, vomiting instantly. A third tried to attack me from behind. I grabbed a chair and smashed it directly into him, sending him flying across the warehouse floor. 3 seconds. That was all it took. The warehouse floor was already covered with bodies. Romina's face turned deathly pale, her legs giving out beneath her as she collapsed onto the ground. Looking at me now, she finally understood fear. James. I strode over to Susan first, untied the ropes around her wrists, and wrapped my coat tightly around her shoulders. Are you hurt? She looked at me, her voice slightly hoarse. I'm okay. But when I saw the blood at the corner of her mouth, the violent fury in my eyes could no longer be suppressed. Chapter 9. I turned to look at Romina. You really have a death wish. She shook her head frantically, tears covering her entire face. I didn't mean to. I was just too afraid of losing everything. Shut up. I kicked the table in front of her over with one violent blow, my voice sharp as a blade. You were afraid of losing things, so that gave you the right to frame people, steal projects, spread slut-shaming rumors, hire online trolls, vandalize homes with paint, and kidnap someone. Then by your logic, couldn't I also say that I'm afraid trash like you will keep hurting innocent people, so burying you alive would be understandable too? Romina was so terrified she forgot how to cry, and right then, the sound of police sirens echoed outside the warehouse. The color drained completely from her face, because she knew, this time, nobody could save her anymore. When the police rushed in and secured the scene, I handed over the recording from moments earlier, along with the warehouse surveillance footage and phone location records. The evidence chain was so airtight even lawyers would praise it. Kidnapping, illegal imprisonment, intentional assault, online defamation, commercial sabotage. Enough charges for her to spend a very long time reflecting on her life behind bars. The day Romina Tang was taken away, every member of the Tang family showed up at the police station. It was the first time I had ever seen Mrs. Tang cry that miserably. Her makeup was ruined. Her hair was disheveled. She looked like someone had ripped the soul straight out of her body. Phineas and Diego both looked awful too, especially Diego, the second brother who had been the loudest, the most protective, and the dumbest from the very beginning, now stood there with eyes red from crying, unable to say a single word, because reality had finally slapped him awake. The little sister he had protected all these years wasn't some innocent fragile flower. She was insane, a lunatic who could slowly corner someone, destroy their reputation, and try to ruin their entire life without hesitation. Too bad. Realizing it now was already too late. Mrs. Tang rushed forward and tried to grab Susan's hand. Susan, Mom is begging you, please talk to the police. She just made a mistake in the heat of the moment. She's still young. She can't go to prison. Susan stood there without even moving away. She simply looked at her quietly. That gaze hurt far more than rejection ever could. You know something? Every single time you beg forgiveness for her, you're telling me one thing, that I deserved all of it. I deserved being framed by her. I deserved being misunderstood by all of you. I deserved being slapped by you. I deserved getting cyberbullied. I even deserved watching the parents who raised me get dragged into this. Because she cried, she automatically became the victim. Because she grew up beside you. Everything she did could be forgiven. But what about me? What exactly did I do wrong? The entrance of the police station fell completely silent. Mrs. Tang stood there with tears streaming down her face, mouth open, yet unable to say a single word, because she had no answer. That slap had already shattered every excuse she once hid behind. I was hurting too. I was conflicted too. Susan looked at her, her voice growing colder and colder. The reason I'm standing here today is not because you loved me. It's because I was strong enough not to be destroyed by all of you. So stop talking to me about forgiveness. You don't deserve it. That sentence stabbed straight into the hearts of every member of the Tang family. Diego finally broke down. I'm sorry. His head lowered, his eyes bloodshot red. Susan, I was stupid. I was blind. I'm sorry. In a cliché melodrama, this would probably be the moment when the real heiress softened. But Susan didn't. She merely looked at him calmly. How much is your apology worth? Can it undo the slap I took? Can it erase the bucket of red paint thrown at my adoptive parents' home? Can it give me back the life that was nearly destroyed? No. Then shut up. Diego froze completely in place. His face shifted between pale and green before he finally lowered his head entirely. I stood beside her without saying a word, because in this moment, she didn't need me anymore. She had already stood up on her own, and that felt better than any revenge, because the greatest growth was never someone avenging you. It was finally learning this. When people owe you pain, you don't have to pretend it never mattered. Chapter 10. After everything ended, the Tang family issued a public apology. The Ku family's reputation completely collapsed. Romina was formally arrested and prosecuted, and in order to calm public outrage, Tang Corporation returned everything that should have belonged to Susan from the very beginning. Shares, status, properties, project authority. She accepted all of it, without refusing a single thing. Some people mocked her behind her back, saying that if she was really so principled, why was she still taking the Tang family's money and assets? When I heard that, I almost laughed out loud. What kind of bullshit logic was that? If it belonged to her, why shouldn't she take it? Only an idiot would refuse. The dumbest thing victims do is suffer injury after injury while still getting emotionally blackmailed with nonsense like, just let it go. Don't be so petty. If you're so proud, then don't take anything. Susan wasn't stupid. She reclaimed everything not because she was greedy for it, but because it already belonged to her in the first place. As for the Tang family, she never went back, not even once. They came many times afterward. Mrs. Tang cried. Phineas lowered his head. Diego stayed silent. Mr. Tang offered compensation, but Susan always had only one response: handle things according to legal boundaries. I knew then, she had truly let go, not forgiven, simply stopped caring. And once someone truly stops caring, nobody can hurt them anymore. 3 months later, we moved into a new home. It wasn't huge, but it was peaceful. The living room had massive floor-to-ceiling windows, and the balcony was filled with flowers she had recently bought. That evening, when I came home and pushed open the door, I saw her wearing comfortable loungewear, crouched on the balcony watering the plants. The sunset poured over her, wrapping her whole body in warm golden light. I stood at the doorway watching her quietly for a while, and suddenly, all the chaos from before, the melodrama, the fighting, the ugliness, the malice, felt impossibly far away. Hearing me enter, she turned around. You're back. Yeah. What do you want for dinner tonight? Anything's fine. She stood up and walked over, carrying a faint floral scent with her. I lowered my head and pulled her into my arms. She froze briefly. What are you doing? Recharging. She laughed softly and wrapped her arms around my waist. James. Yeah. Thank you. I looked down at her. For what? Thank you for not telling me to endure everything back then. Thank you for telling me not to let it go when everyone else wanted me to. And thank you for making me realize that I'm not some character destined to suffer in one of those cliché melodramatic stories. She looked up at me, eyes shining brightly. I can win. My chest suddenly felt warm. Of course you can. You won't just win. You'll win beautifully. She smiled. Outside the window, the evening clouds painted half the sky crimson while the wind drifted inside, gently rustling the flower leaves. I lowered my head and kissed her forehead softly, and at that exact moment, I suddenly realized something. Those floating plot words that had once been everywhere, had completely disappeared. I couldn't see them anymore. As though that ridiculous melodramatic world trying to control everything had finally admitted one truth. It could never defeat us, because truly powerful people are never the ones who cry prettily, manipulate others, or survive on sympathy. They're the clear-headed ones, the ones who fight back when hurt, the ones who reclaim justice when wronged, the ones who refuse to forgive those who harm them. And even more importantly, they're the people who have someone standing beside them, telling them, you don't have to be understanding, you don't have to keep yielding, you don't have to swallow your pain just to preserve someone else's dignity. Whoever hurts you pays the price. Whoever owes you will return it with interest. That is what a story should look like. And Susan and I had finally torn that rotten melodramatic script into pieces. From now on, she was no longer anyone's real heiress, nor was she some tragic victim in somebody else's story. She was simply Susan, the Susan I treasured more than anything, the Susan who, if anyone dared touch her, I'd make them regret it for the rest of their lives, and we would stay together, eating well, sleeping well, kissing well, living longer, better, and happier than every single person who once hoped we would fall apart.